Welcome to Driving.ca. I'm Jay Canna and I'm with the 2023 Lexus RZ, their first dedicated full EV on an all-new platform. And Lexus is a little late to the party, and there's basically two thoughts behind it. One is, if you're not first, you're last. And then the other side is, well, let's sit back, see what everybody else does, get all that information, get all that intelligence, and create something brand new for us based off what else is out there, what consumers want, and how things actually shape up in the very competitive electric vehicle market. In this video, we're going to do four things. We'll talk about the outside, we'll talk about the inside, we'll get the RZ on the road and talk about charging times and range and what it's like to drive, and we'll wrap up by talking about the competition and where exactly the RZ sits. Looking at the front of the RZ, you'll notice a very familiar spindle shape, as almost all other Lexuses have as far as this massive size goes. And because it's an EV, you don't need a grille because there's no air to push through, but it has that really pronounced shape. And yes, this has the optional two-tone paint job. I'm not really a fan of it. I think it looks a little out of place, especially for a Lexus vehicle. A cool thing here is that the logo lights up and there's a heating component to it, so you don't get any snow or ice locked onto it. It'll just melt away. And there's a bunch of sensors up front. Overall, the front end doesn't look bad. It's very consistent with Lexus' design language. I think I'd like it a lot more if it had one solid color for paint. Either way, it looks really, really good from the side profile. These are the upgraded 20-inch tires. I would recommend not going with them because you lose a bunch of range, and a lot more on that once we get into the car. The rim design's really, really busy, and I think the 18s would suit the vehicle a lot better. Finally, we come to the rear, and the biggest omission for me here is there is no rear wiper. There are these little wingtip spoilers, and Lexus says that's going to create enough force to push any kind of precipitation down the window, off of it, against this little ledge here and onto the ground. So they say you'll get maximum visibility. I don't really buy it. And the Kia EV6 and the Hyundai Ioniq 5 also have big misses as far as the rear wiper goes. I would have put one in here. Let's talk about the interior of the 2023 Lexus RZ, starting with what the driver sees right in front of them. The digital instrument cluster isn't fully digital. It's mostly digital. There's a big screen, but you can see that it doesn't stretch all the way across. There's no big pronounced hood for the instrument cluster, but there's a small one underneath, so you lose a lot of the glare and you still get a full view of exactly what's happening. This is the top trim executive, and it has this terrible driver attention monitor, and if you look at the screen for a couple of seconds too long while you're playing with your climate or doing something there, it'll beep at you saying eyes off road, pay attention. If you're wearing sunglasses, the system doesn't work because it can't see through your sunglasses. I like the idea, I just don't like the execution of it. You do have your odometer trip buttons and your brightness for the dashboard just to the left here. Memory seats are actually on the dashboard as opposed to being on the door panel. Interesting move, and the reason they did that is that these door panels are so beautiful, clean, and elegant. Just a nice soft touch material all the way around. It's not cluttered, and it gives it an extra luxurious look and feel. You do have Lexus's typical door handles as far as newer models go, and they match the outside ones with a fixed handle, and here it's just you push a button, open the door, close it up, done and done. Let's talk about the 14-inch infotainment screen. Yes, there's voice commands. I don't like how there's so much reliance on it. Yes, there are multifunction touchpads on the steering wheel of higher trims. The good thing is you can program them, and what I've done is instead of screwing around with the infotainment system, trying to change my drive modes, I've just programmed them on the right side. You can get your temperature controls also. They're minimalized. They're not fully what you have here in the screen, but you can get your basics done on the steering wheel. It's a good way to do it, but I still wish there was at least a couple of hard touch buttons here. As far as the system itself, typical Lexus as far as their new style goes. Again, not a lot of digging to get to what you need, but there's still a little too much reliance happening here. Interestingly, this is the first Lexus to go away from the traditional gear lever, and they've gone to a dial system. It's pretty foolproof. You've got to push down and turn right to go to drive. You've got to push down and turn left to go to reverse, and push down straight to get into neutral, and park is its own separate button, so you can't just accidentally twist it because there's a lock mechanism on it, and that keeps everybody safer on the road. One thing I like is where the power button is. It's right at the top, away from almost all hand traffic, except if you're adjusting the driver's side vent. Very peculiar move here is that Lexus has taken out the glove box. It's kind of a staple of all cars, and they've decided, you know what, we don't need it. We don't want it in this RZ vehicle. Interesting move. Now, they say there's storage under here, which there is, and you got a higher lip on the driver's side, but if I'm keeping my insurance and my registration and anything personal documentation wise, I don't want it out and exposed. So where's the owner's manual, you may ask? Well, it's in the trunk. There's a lot of space. There's underfloor storage as well. I just think it's a weird move here. Now, on the flip side, there are radiant heaters in the front footwells to keep your feet warm for both driver and passenger. Cool move, and it uses less power than using the actual HVAC system, so good job on Lexus for that innovation. Give me back my glove box and maybe put a rear wiper back while you're at it. The top executive trim gets the ultra suede seats, and they're made out of 30% bio-based materials. So not only is Lexus going zero emissions, but they're doing that on the inside too. And I think it's a really good move as far as pairing what they're doing overall with what's happening on the inside. They don't move as many ways as some of the competitors do, so it's not an 18-way seat here. You've got your basics forwards, backwards, ups, downs, and the seat back moves forwards, backwards, and you got some lumbar support. I would have liked to have seen a thigh extender, maybe a couple of more ways to move the seat, seeing as this is their brand new first ever electric vehicle. The top trim executive also gets a 13-speaker Mark Levinson audio system. Sounds really, really sharp. And you have to do that kind of stuff, especially if you're late to the game as far as your first EV. You really want to make a statement, and Mark Levinson is my favorite audio system in the entire industry, so I'm happy that Lexus has put it in here. Back to the center console, you do get wireless charging, you do get 2 cup holders, parking brake, auto hold, and your traction control on and off. A small piece of compensation for the glove box is you get a pretty deep storage bin here in the center console. Yes, it opens both ways so the driver and passenger can get to it pretty easily. There's a fair amount of stuff you can put in here. I still want my glove box back though, and just maybe it's a habit, maybe I'm showing my age, but this is just one of those things that it's peculiar that it's missing. The RZ has borrowed from the Venza as far as their panoramic sunroof goes. There's no shade and there's a bar in between, so it's split. So yes, it's panoramic, but it could be seen as one oversized panel up front, one oversized one in the rear. And with a touch of a button, light comes in. You can see there's a light in my face. Push it again and it gets tinted out. I think it's a cool move. I don't know if I would be able to live with it all the time, because sometimes the rear passengers don't want any light, or they do want light. So traditionally, you can have that roller shade just cover half of it. Either way, it's a really cool technology, and it's innovative, and that's what the RZ is, and that's what the RZ is shooting for. A quick touch on the rear seats. You do get outboard heated seats. You get 3 different levels, 2 USB ports, and you have your AC 120. Your center armrest does come down. It only gets you cup holders, and I think a big miss here was that there's no center pass-through. It's just solid material here. It's nice material, looks great, but as far as added functionality, maybe in a future generation or maybe a mid-cycle refresh, they'll have an actual pass-through here. The seats themselves are pretty comfortable. I could see myself hanging out for maybe a couple hours. You do get a couple of lights up here, and again, the big panoramic sunroof is just split into 2 for the rear portion. On the road with the 2023 Lexus RZ 450e, let's go through some numbers. So it's a 71.4 kilowatt per hour battery, and you get 308 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque, and it's an all-wheel drive system, and it's specifically their new Direct 4 all-wheel drive. And the big thing here is you can split the torque from 0 to 100 to 100 to 0. Gives you a lot more traction. You get a 150 kilowatt motor up front, you get an 80 kilowatt motor around the rear, hence the all-wheel drive. Let's get to the important stuff, which is range. If you go with the 18-inch wheels on lower trims, you get 354 kilometers of range. You bump up to the 20-inch rims, and that goes way down to 315. I don't think that's enough, personally speaking, where we're still in the early adoption days of electric vehicles, and as people make the transition, they want the same feeling that they have with their internal combustion vehicles. And that's where they get 400, 450, 500 kilometers to a full tank, if not more. I think Lexus missed the mark here by going as low as 315. And even on the high end at 354, it's not great compared to what else is out there. And we'll dig more into that once we go through the competition. But back to the driving side of things, it feels really smooth and very luxurious. And I'm not going to complain about the horsepower and torque, because 308 and 317, it's plenty. You don't need this to be incredibly fast off the line. You don't need it to be lightning quick. You need it to get you and your passengers to and from in style with plenty of power. I'm going to kick down for a sec It's all there. And with any EV, even that little Mazda MX-30 with low numbers, there's still that instant torque and it feels really, really good. The ride quality is especially soft and supple, and that's traditional Lexus for you, especially the newer models where they've gone over and above and making sure that the ride comfort, not only for the driver, but for all the passengers, are beyond expectations. A miss here for Lexus is the lack of one-pedal driving, and you have 4 levels of regen you can control through your paddles instead. Lexus wants EV driving with them to be a transition, hence the reason for the no one-pedal driving. They want you to just take your foot off the accelerator, and regardless of what level of regen you have, you got to push down on the brake to get to an actual stop, and that goes back to the traditional driving without any regen, just full gasoline, accelerator to go, and a brake pedal to stop. Interestingly, there are 2 little red lights at the bottom of the instrument cluster, and they show up when the brakes go on. So whether I manually put them on like I'm doing right now, you can see me slowing down, or I get back up to speed, my regen is on the highest level, I'll take my foot off the accelerator, and as it slows down, the brake lights go on, because you don't want to cause a collision by somebody not understanding what's happening with your vehicle. If you're slowing down quickly, brake lights will go on a lot faster. If I'm going to go up to a level 1 for the regen, which is the lightest amount, foot's off the accelerator, and I'm gently slowing down, but the brake lights aren't on. Level 2 not on, level 3 not on, level 4 finally they come on. It's a cool system that lets both you and others know when your brakes are on, even if your foot's not being applied to it. Let's talk about drive modes, and there are 5 of them: normal, sport, eco, custom, and range. And range does exactly what you'd think it does. It maximizes the amount of range you have. So basically it maxes you out at 100 kilometers an hour. The AC gets kicked off and you only have the use of your front motor, hence still letting you drive the vehicle, but getting rid of all the things that suck up range. Now, speaking of sucking up range, the HVAC system does quite a bit of that. I've got 73 kilometers on the clock right now. I want to put my fan on 1, and now it's down to 56. And I'm not saying it's a specific Lexus RZ problem, it's just any EV, but I find it to be a little stronger as far as the amount of range that you lose here with the RZ. The rest of the drive modes are exactly as you'd expect. Eco maximizes your range, not as much as range maximizes your range. Normal is where the majority of people will live, and sport is, well, you want to get some excitement and extra oomph out of your RZ, you pop into sport and off you go. A peculiar move is Lexus has not put a battery percentage indicator. Instead, you have 2 things. You have the exact number of kilometers remaining, and you have what looks like a gas gauge as you do in traditional vehicles, but there is a little electric socket attached to the image of it, and it goes down as you go through more range and you deplete it. It's not as convenient as a percentage meter, but with the 2 you're given, it's plenty enough to get by. Let's jump into charging times, and there's some really interesting stuff here. So level 1, it's around 50 hours, and that's your household plug. Level 2, I've got 2 pieces of information. Website says 9.5 hours, and the press release is at 11 hours, and that's to go up to 100%. Let's call it the middle, at 10, maybe 10 and a half. And still not too bad. It's basically an overnight, and it'll be pretty rare that you bring your RZ home completely empty. So you won't, if not at all, charge from a full 0 battery up to full. Level 3 is where things get interesting. So Lexus says to go from quote-unquote low battery up to 80%, it'll take 30 minutes, and that's at a 150 kilowatt charge. I dug in their website, and I dug and I dug and I dug, because it's a new vehicle, and in this tiny little disclaimer button, it says you cannot fast charge this more than twice per day. So to me, with a tiny range to begin with for the max of 354 and a minute 315, I don't think you could do many road trips with this on a long distance. I'm sure you can get to Montreal, but you can't DC fast charge overnight. And it's a really strange move, and Lexus says it's to preserve the battery health, and I totally understand that. Battery technology in vehicles is relatively new compared to the entire industry, but stopping you at 2 just seems like a really big compromise as far as a vehicle that's a little north of $80,000. For an in-between size vehicle, as it's not as small as the NX and it's not as large as the RX, it handles surprisingly well. It's a taller vehicle, it's still a crossover, it's got a taller frame to it, but It handles the turns and twists and curves really well. I've gone on city streets, I've gone on country roads, and not only does the RZ perform very well in a straight line, but all the twists and turns are handled with relative ease. And you're not going to whip this thing around at 80 kilometers an hour around a turn, but for everyday driving and the conditions and turns that the municipalities and engineers have put in, the RZ handles really well. It's pretty quiet in the cabin, and thank you for the sound deadening materials here. It's a really comfortable place to be. The seats feel great. A lot of soft touch materials here, and the screen being angled towards me. I don't like it from a symmetry point of view, but from a functional point of view, it does the trick really nicely, and everything's well within reach. Even these thumb pads, which I'm not a big fan of, but I understand why they're here, and thankfully they can be customized. Just before we go into the wrap-up, cargo space comes in at nearly 1,000 liters, 988. Pretty good. It still makes it very, very functional, and you have that space underneath as well. So you can be functional with this, but a bit of the problem is still having no glove box. Part of that underfloor space will be taken up with the owner's manual and the charging cable and a few other things. So where does the Lexus fit in with the competition? Well, I've got 4 competitors here. Let's quickly go through them. BMW iX xDrive 40. Range is 356 kilometers, price is around 80,000 to start. Genesis GV70 electrified, range is 383, price is all in 84,150. Tesla Model Y, 2 options here. You get the long range at 497 kilometers, and that runs you a touch under 70,000, or you go for the performance pack, range dips a bit to 459 kilometers, price goes up to 76,290. And finally, the Audi Q4 e-tron, 380 kilometers of range, 59,950. You can add different options in your freight and your taxes to that. So here's where the Lexus RZ comes in price-wise itself. Signature trim comes in at 64,950. Luxury trim comes in at 73,550. And what I have here, which is the executive package, $80,950. I can't balance it out with the small amount of range that it has. Again, I don't know if people will gravitate towards this because of the range. I think people are going to buy this because they're used to Lexus's build quality. They're used to the driving feel. They're used to having a ton of luxurious materials all the way throughout. It looks good, it feels good, all of your touch points are exceptional, but between being maxed out at 2 DC fast charges per day, range at either 354 or a very lowly 315, it's a trade-off, right? If you're primarily a city dweller and sometimes you go to a cottage or do a smaller road trip, then yeah, the RZ makes sense. But if you're looking to do longer drives and you don't have hours and hours and hours to wait to recharge, and you don't mind having a bit of a lower range rate, then the RZ will absolutely work for you. It worked for the RX when it first came out over 20 years ago, and it's now one of the best-selling luxury SUVs consistently, not just for a couple of years. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the RZ as far as adoption rate goes. People that will get it are absolutely in love with the Lexus brand. They like what it has to offer. But Lexus might have a bit of a difficult time getting those conquest customers, getting those customers to be pulled away from other brands, whether it's EV to EV, hybrid to EV here, or a full internal combustion engine to an EV. In a world where we're racing towards electrification, I think this is a solid first effort from Lexus with their RZ 450e. I'm really curious to see what kind of mid-cycle refresh updates come through, hopefully something with a little more range. If you've got any questions on the 2023 Lexus RZ 450e, let us know in the comments. We're always happy to engage in respectful conversation. For more news, reviews, and information you can use on luxury EVs and all EVs for that matter, visit our website, Driving.ca, and connect with us on our social media channels. For Driving.ca, I'm Jay Canna.